Well, I met Staniel actually in Los Angeles before he was just moving to Berlin, and we just hit it off immediately, and we connected on so many levels. And when he moved to Berlin, we had always talked about working together. He'd seen a film I did called Hip Beat, and we decided to embark on this short together, and we just loved the experience. And we were sitting at dinner one night after the short was wrapped, and he started telling me about his story and how he felt he was in a time in his life that he wanted to go back home to Guinea-Bissau for the first time in 17 years, and kind of connect with his family again and confront his father, and really kind of felt this connection. It was about the right time in his life to make this film. So we started hashing out the ideas and the concepts, and we always had a plot and an outline, but we kept it open to changing and open to adapting to the journey itself, kind of that cinema verite style, but it had a structure in the beginning. And so that's kind of how we started. We did it over dinner, and I just thought it was such a courageous, brave approach to a story, and something that I hadn't seen in the sense. And I've seen a lot of cinema, so I just was excited, and it piqued my curiosity.
Now, was there a point when you thought, Daniel, model, good-looking guy, but doesn't have a lot of acting experience?
Well, we had made that short film together, so that was a great segue into knowing what his potential in that, in acting and understanding story. He's a great storyteller as well, fantastic storyteller, and what really drew me to is how vulnerable he is and how open he is and expressive, and and that's I thought really important, to see this very strong man, but also this vulnerability and this sensitivity. And since we kind of co-wrote it and we worked it together as partners, it was something that it had to be coming from the most honest perspective, and something that someone who could really understand the complexity and the nuance of it, and that was Daniel. So, and I always work with him if a role comes up, because he just has so much range and potential, but great work ethic as well.
And at what point did you think, okay, this is going to be 50% subtitles, 70% subtitles?
When we were doing it, we created questions for each family member, each part of the journey, and because obviously he would have to speak it. I actually learned a little bit of Portuguese Creole in the journey, because it was something that you just start to pick up little things, and the words, especially in the editing room. But when we would go over the questions, obviously in English, and then when we'd start hashing out the questions he would ask, we would translate it. So we were always kind of in sync, me and him talking a lot about what we were going to do, and constantly updating each other about what are questions that we want to bring up, what we want to talk about, what's important to you, how do we make this work as an overall arc of the story, where does it fit in. So we were constantly in a balance and dancing together, trying to figure out as the journey was going, and rewriting and retelling what we need to convey. And then, of course, in the editing room is where we kind of really, put the structure together. So yeah, it was a little bit daunting at first, especially, because I was DP on this, I was shooting it. So I'd have to read sometimes, okay, when is the conversation changing? When is it now the next question? Like, when do I switch that camera on to one of the other people? And so that was a little bit like a challenge, but I found that you kind of can still get, if you look at the body language, you can kind of like pick up on the mood and the feeling, and where to point the camera.
And speaking of the mood, you open up with these beautiful sunsets.
Mm-hmm.
And most DPs won't stay focused on that sunset for more than 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
You let it run. You let it run.
Yeah.
You create the mood. And when
Yeah.
you create that mood, a lot of dark in the beginning.
Yeah.
Maybe you're creating that mood for the darkness of his life story.
Yeah.
Did that flow through the whole movie for you? You're thinking of palettes and how the colors we're gonna use.
Yeah, it did. That's actually a really good question, because actually I didn't know if people would notice that, but that does. It's this internal journey, and it gets more bright and colorful as he goes closer to his mother's home. So that was a big thing, and I was actually editing the film in Paris and doing coloring there and stuff, and Daniel came several times, and I was inspired by a lot of the expressionist painters there, and just the colors they would use and the mood of the darkness going to light. And so that was a big adamant thing, like, it's starting out more moody, and certain scenes being more moody because it's what he's feeling on the inside. No, you're correct about that.
Was it emotional for Staniel to go through this process? Um, Acting.
Oh yeah, no, I mean it was definitely a challenge, and it was something where, he was constantly going through it, and and was facing, certain traumas and certain things to help him heal, and he knew that he needed to do that, and he knew what his intention was and what was important for him and his journey. And everyone heals differently, everyone expresses differently, everyone finds their own way and processes different things in different perspectives. And so it was something it was a tender moment. It was definitely very vulnerable at moments. This is, you'll see in the film, there's really this unleash of emotion that kind of is a built up of his heart from childhood to that present moment. But we were always kind of, there for one of another. I understand the vulnerability being, when you're acting, you're being vulnerable with emotions and when it deals with family. And so it was something that, there was, he definitely didn't show anything that it was affecting him in a way to affect the process. But it's definitely not the easiest thing when you're facing your trauma and you're making steps to healing that.
Now, we talk about the war, the war that happened and that changed things. When we were getting this documentary, when you're doing notes, was that a big factor in the storytelling?
Well, the thing is, we always wanted to make fictional elements with this, so like everyone's kind of playing a version of themselves, but we wanted to keep fictional things in the story because it's something where I was very inspired by, filmmakers who did like avant-garde cinema and kind of what was happening in the 60s and John Cassavetes, where they blended real people with fictional elements of story to kind of keep the honesty and the authenticity. And so that was always something where we'd have to play with the narrative and then what it was documentary. So we were always blending those hybrid version, I suppose. And so it was a constant dance, with, like I said, between me and him, because a lot of other people were kind of in the moment and didn't get as much information about what the process was going to be. But he was always like guiding it and making sure it was smooth. So we were just constantly rewriting and constantly shaping the narrative as we were going along, and finding people who we could cast that were authentic, or people that could be in the story or that were impactful in it. So we could bring those two worlds together,
When you shot in West Africa versus when you brought the film, you started the film in Europe, what was the time frame that went on that?
So we shot in winter because, I always say what's after winter is spring, so rebirth. So we wanted it in winter, and we got really lucky in Berlin. It was actually, we shot that part in part of a lockdown because it was the whole snow caps over Berlin froze over, the river, the canals. And that doesn't happen that often, And so it was like, well, it's a perfect symbolism for him to walk on the ice, on this water, and the water is connected to your subconscious and to dreams, so it was playing into that symbolism again. And so it was something where we shot that several months before actually shooting in West Africa, because we had to, schedule that, and that was a little bit tricky to do at time, and when was the right time, and prep for that. So, it felt like almost two different shoots in a way, but that's what we wanted. We wanted it to feel like two different worlds and to show a big contrast of that.
Stephanie and Staniel. What brought Stephanie?
Well, Stephanie's a sister, so and it was something where to have an ally of somebody who's processing something differently and going through it and not in the same not in the same emotional journey as necessarily they are, and so it was a nice because they're both experiencing the same thing, but at the same time they both process the things very differently and both have different intentions. She's out to connect her family and her roots, but also for her family, for her children, for her future generations, and to understand like the lineage and the story of their family, as he's more dealing with and wrestling with the emotions of his father and his trauma. So it's a nice contrast where one is very determined. She even has a line in the film where she's like, "I'm not going to focus on my trauma. I'm here to, I'm just going to move past that and move through it." And for her, she's like much more trying to piece it all together. So it's a nice a journey together, because you see that they're both dealing with the same things, but they deal with it differently.
Now, with Staniel doing a lot of the narration and his voiceover,
yes,
did it start off that way, or did that add more to it as it went?
We definitely in the post-production we'd add elements. I mean, we had a lot. We recorded a lot of voiceover for sure. We wrote a lot of stuff together. We did a lot of the voiceovers, but we had ideas we wanted to do voiceover because we wanted to have a contrast between between what he's thinking inside, and what's being perceived on the outside, and playing with that, and keeping the audience engaged and in his head, about really what he's wrestling with his past and the resilience of him going on this journey. And also, you know, to keep those questions within the audience, because he's searching for a lot of things. And it was something where I felt, and we felt, that it would add an element that you couldn't just convey, leaving it that like very subjective.